Yeah, one of my favorite topics tonight, relationships. We're going to have fun. I will do a prayer of gratitude to start things off, then a brief overview of what is energy healing. Then we will dive into tonight's topic. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being this live webinar, and the source and the course and goal of everyone who's here. Thank you for the presence and contributions of everyone's ancestors, without which we would not have our physical bodies to be present, so God bless the ancestors. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom, which holds the position of anchoring the flow of knowledge and wisdom, again, without which we wouldn't have much going on. Hi. May tonight's webinar be enlightening and successful. May we work concisely and powerfully to address the source of everyone's interest in relationships and open up and reveal information that's new, as well as doing important healings for the field of relationships. Thank you everyone so much for being with me. All right. And thank you everyone who's here. Thanks. Okay, so what is energy healing? What is energy healing? For the new people on tonight's session, though, energy healing in a nutshell is using awareness or attention to interface with those aspects of our lives, of our physiologies, in our relationships, with our manifesting skills in a way which promotes maximum success. It's a focus of attention. It's the focus of attention. So we're using attention, we're harnessing attention as the tool, as the means by which the healing process occurs. Leveraging it. All right. So that's the basic of energy healing. I was enjoying lots of great downloads for today's session. And of course, looking deeply into the nature of relationships. When we look deeply into the nature of relationships, first we see them on the surface, right? And then we notice that, well, all relationships basically have their seed in the relationship of divinity with its own nature. So that's the foundation. That's step one, is that divinity is self-interacting, and the byproduct is like all this, all of these lovely crystals behind me and everything. So it goes to follow that the ability to nourish and develop and nurture and promote and create wonderful relationships is therefore based upon each of our relationships with that process, that divine process of divinity folding into its own nature and then creating all this. So, as you know, I get these downloads and I was looking at them, and every time we have a webinar, new information comes out. So what happens is some of the information that I receive, like, oh, it would be good to talk about this and that, it comes in a complete form, but some of it comes in an incomplete form. And I realize that it's doing that because it's only within the context of our group, of our collective work here in the webinar, that I'm actually able to unfold certain deeper, more elaborated or abstract aspects of the process that we're working with. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is some of the, like my outline, just giving you the outline. I wanted to talk about how we interface with our physiologies and with the very fine process of divinity self-interacting, but particularly that relationship with the body, because I know that ultimately the overarching principle here is energy healing. And so we're healing relationships, but we're also healing everything. We're healing everything about ourselves. So that relationship, I got some really luscious new information to share with you on that. I wanted to talk a little bit about first relationships, because all relationships unfold or unfurl from the first relationships, which as humans are the relationships with parents. The first relationships are the first interfamily relationships, intrafamily relationships within the family. So I thought it would be good I was looking at that and receiving blessings of deeper information about those relationships and how the first processes of the relationship paradigm arise from our first relationships with parents. But the information that came up that was new information, and as it came up, I'm like, oh, what's that about? And the answer was, well, you'll just have to find out, was with regards to a concept that was brought to me by a lovely woman who's on tonight's webinar. I think she's watching remotely. Oh yeah, don't mind the guy. It's a great picture if I just stand right there. Okay. And so there's a lovely woman who's a local healer and Ayurvedic technician and a Jyotishi, and has been working in the energy healing field for a long time. And she brought this word to me not too long ago, and that was cosmic. I think she called it the cosmic wave. It was her concept was that there's a kind of pattern of energy ebbing and flowing in the entire cosmic field of creation, and that she kind of tunes into that when she's doing Jyotish charts for people, which for anybody who's not familiar with the term Jyotish chart, that means basically astrological chart, but Jyotish being a very ancient form of astrology, much older than what we would think of as our modern astrology. So you can imagine the movement of the planets creates a kind of ebb and flow. But then also she said when she's doing massage work with people, that she can feel the physical ebbing and flowing within the physiology. And as I was looking at the principle of relationships, and the principle of how we all have blind spots, right? So I was looking at this element of the natural tendency of humans is to have certain areas that we just can't see. That's just the way it is. That's the way it is with the human nervous system. You've heard me talk about it before. Our senses of perception have natural built-in limitations, and our nervous system has this natural built-in limitation. And so we all naturally have these particular blind spots. However, the energy healing process requires an evolution of the senses of perception and an evolution of the nervous system in order to embody divinity and in order to refine sensory perception to such a point that we can fathom to any level of creation. And whatever the illness is facing a person at the surface, it's possible to use attention, because remember, that's the key for energy healing, right? And to get right down into the source or the key or the nut, the seed of that illness. And then from that point, promote transformation by addressing that seed with attention in such a way that the seed transforms, that it restructures. Sometimes it's a matter of resetting the system. Sometimes it's just a matter of modifying the karma somewhat so that instead of something terrible happening, something a little bit nice happens. All right. So I wanted to look at that ebb and flow. And yes, I think she called it the cosmic wave. Thank you for that term. Credit where it's due. And its relationship with the elimination, or I would say the integration of the ability to transcend blind spots. And as you can imagine in the field of relationships, like that's really important, right? Because, okay, This is important. This is now, I'm going to set a little bit the stage for talking about relationships. All right, so in our lives, we go through each experience with each person we know, looking at our connection with them from our own individual perspective. Then what happens when a person either their consciousness evolves to a very high level so that they're not only perceiving life through their own individual nervous system, but through the entire field at the same time, or everybody who dies gets a chance to go back and review every interaction with everybody throughout their lifetime, not only from their own unique perspective, but from everybody's perspective. It's really powerful to do that. And that's what we call the life review, right? And that happens after death. We go back and review. But reviewing from the broader perspective of one's own point of perception and everybody else's point of perception provides a holistic and complete understanding of the nature of divinity self-interacting in each particular situation. So I would say that the underlying premise then for today's session, for this webinar, is to organize ourselves to be able to appreciate our relationships from that perspective without leaving the body. Just direct. So it is the nature of the individual to not want to become overwhelmed, to set up or to work within the limitations and boundaries of the senses of perception and of the nervous system. But it is the nature of consciousness to be completely unbounded. It is the nature of consciousness to be innocently awake to its own nature. And so what we're doing right now, we're moving into a healing. We're looking at the gap. We're looking at the point where consciousness collapses onto its own nature. And then just before, just to define the stages of the gap, and I won't use the Sanskrit terms because I don't want to confuse those who don't speak Sanskrit, but there are 4 phases of the gap. And this is very important, and it does relate to blind spots, because there is a kind of a divine cycle it's that wave, it's the cosmic wave, it's this divine dialogue, which I've referred to in the past. It's this cycle of divinity self-interacting, and involves the collapsing of what we know and understand into a place where it's no longer present in its original form. And then that's point number 1, it collapses. Then it comes to rest in the field of silence. So then point number 1, collapse. Point number 2, resting in silence. Point number 3, awake to its own state of dynamic alertness. And then point number 4, re-emergence into the field of the relative. So the area that we're looking at in this healing is the space between the alert to its own nature and the re-emergence. Some of the local scholars had been asking me some questions about this, and they were saying, where exactly in that process is the causal body? And for those of you who've been with me for a while, you know that the causal body is that point in the individual potential where healing is manifested and promoted in the most powerful manner. It is the part of being which has access to infinite resource that comes out of the silence and is able to harness that resource and then apply it to the field of the relative. Okay, so we want to look at that point where being is awake and alert to its own nature, but it hasn't quite yet emerged. So the causal body occurs after the emergence. The causal body is the first point of the emergence of that, or the manifestation of that alertness. But the alertness, the silence, and then the awake to its own nature are both happening within the field of Nothing has manifested yet. Qualityless, infinite, unbounded being, source of creation. However, the resource, the infinite resource which we draw upon to promote evolutionary transformation, is accessible from the awakened to its own nature level of that source of creation. So I was looking at it earlier tonight, and what I noticed was that when being is alert to its own nature, but it hasn't manifested yet, there is this exquisite innocence, this pure, it's very, very pure quality of presence of being. So with the support of all the consciousness of everyone here, we're looking right at that point where that presence of being quality starts to become something. It starts to become a form or a shape. Now, as I was looking at this earlier, what happened was I had a very clear memory of myself as an infant. Before I had established relationships, before I had defined who I was, or defined, even come to a kind of means of understanding my relationships. And what I realized is children, when they're little, they're often experiencing themselves in that state of innocent, pure potential awareness or alertness. But because of the nature of the nervous system at the time of smallness, youngness, it's not possible for people to define their experience for themselves at that point. They just are. So what happens to relationships is they begin before they have been defined. They begin as like a pure impulse of life force coming up through the physiology, coming up through the being as a kind of I would say an interaction of the basic constituents of the physiology, some of the basic energies of the physiology. So each person's early impulses of intelligence will rise up with different combinations of what we call the three gunas. Try not to give you too many Vedic terms, but the qualities of purity, or just moving of energy, or the more breaking down energies, the more breaking apart energies. And so these are parts of this cyclic flow, this cosmic wave, as my friend described it, or divine dialogue. The building up side we associate with purity. The breaking down side we associate with destructive energies. And then there's the energy that kind of keeps it all moving. What I'm feeling is the presence of everyone in the entire collective of our healing as little people, little infant people, tiny people, young. And at that point where you understand your presence and your potential, but cannot yet vocalize or verbalize the experience. And what I'm experiencing is that everyone notices a lot of complexity in their relationship with their parents, and complexity in the relationship of the parents with each other. So these complexities are experienced as a very young person, as a kind of a field of sensory input, basically. And our bodies are processing the sort of more complex interactions between parents, or between our parents and our siblings, or other people in our immediate environment when we're little. It's experiencing it as an expression of self. in that space, the senses of perception are exceedingly refined. And so the benefit of the refinement of the senses of perception are the memory is being reawakened for everybody in this healing session. You already know what it's like to have refined perception. You already know. But at that time, the refined perception wasn't integrated because there was no way to really understand it. So what we're doing now is we're adding in the benefit of the present level of consciousness that can understand complexities of adult relationships and can understand, can define details of this world. Everybody's also receiving a download of a complete set of codes or understandings of the laws of nature, of this universe, just in case any of you weren't 100% sure that you had all the resources required to make sense out of the unknown. This is not being uncertain about how to make sense out of the unknown is, I would say, the number one reason that we create blind spots. So we can open up those blind spots. Even though it's the nature of this reality, this human reality with our human nervous systems, to filter out certain amounts of information, probably most information coming in, we're filtering it out. Even though it doesn't mean that we're locked in or tied in to filtering anything specific. This healing is about opening up and creating a sort of deep flexibility in the field of perception and awareness that allows you to basically gain access to any area of information, even that which has been held over the long course of time through ancestral behaviors and patterns or through the long course of the story of the soul as a blind spots. It's starting in the heart. I'm going to say the lack of fear, but besides the fact that some fear for some people is clearing from the heart area, the important thing is there's a natural wisdom in the deepest sort of inner chamber of the heart energy center, which absolutely understands and knows. It's like I would say the home base for the download that everyone just received about all the particular codes or laws of nature that are responsible for the way we function in this reality as human beings. And that includes anybody who's listening who doesn't have a physical body, but is also yoked to this reality, because we're all still sharing this reality. This means your ancestors, for example. Not all your ancestors are still alive, but it doesn't mean that they're not present. They're still sharing this space with us. And what I'm feeling is a kind of a deep excitement and bliss. It's rising up from deeper in the physiology. Looks like between the second and third chakras of the physiology, we've got this awakening of energy, which is a good, strong, powerful energy. It is anchoring the stability of your personal power. And it's having a very kind of delicate, kind of soft, almost angelic resonance in the center of the heart chakra area. Good job, everybody. That is beautiful. So just to reiterate, we've got the rise of a wave of energy coming from the between, I'd say, the second and a half chakra approximately, so between second and third chakras, and it's rising up, and it has a sort of a scintillating joy in it, which is then interacting with the download that's sitting in everyone's heart chakra to promote integration of understanding of the download in terms of, I'm going to say angelic perspective. But mind you, for those of you who are new, when I say angelic perspective, I don't mean something out there. I mean something in here. I mean an aspect of one's own causal field, which naturally resonates with particular energies that we associate with angels, such as compassion and ability to manipulate natural law and deepest, profound understanding of who you are at your core, and ability to move through space and time with the slightest intention, etc. So a byproduct of this particular healing is integration with one's own angelic capabilities. And whenever we have a structure that sits in the causal field, and of course, angelic capabilities are kind of archetypal forms that sit in the causal field. That's why we're all sort of familiar with the concept here. And then it naturally will always have a complementary opposite. And what we're finding as the complementary opposite is the application of this beautiful, light, very well integrated and stabilized in everybody's physiology, angelic energies, moving through time and space and culture, particularly to areas of the world where people are still dealing with long-held, kind of entrenched energies which make people in a collective way feel as if they're not powerful. This is so important because, and it so deeply and intimately relates to relationships, because one of the things that makes trouble in relationships is when an individual feels powerless. Often, there are basically two ways that we deal with a feeling of powerlessness. The first and most common way to deal with a feeling of powerlessness is to decide to not deal with it and start bringing in a lot of habits and patterns of avoidance. When we're dealing with the unknown, when we're dealing with a challenge, when we're dealing with something that could be a potential problem, the first and unfortunately most common way to deal with that is to bring in those patterns of resistance. Like, hey, it would be easier to just not deal with this. And that particular pattern only works temporarily. And then after a while, it doesn't work anymore because you doesn't make the problem go away, right? You still will have to deal with it at some point. And the longer a problem sits undealt with, the longer it has time to grow and become entrenched in the system and become even more difficult to deal with. The other way, of course, of dealing with it is to deal with it. And that means moving into the unknown. It means moving into a challenging situation that one may or may not feel prepared or resourceful to deal with. We're looking at a major blind spot here, and that is when we're dealing with a problem situation within the context of the divine dialogue, we're dealing with the collapse. And there's this tendency, this habit, and I see it goes back centuries. When we're dealing with the sort of worst part of the collapsing side of the situation, there's a tendency to think, oh, well, this is just the default mode. This is the way it always goes, isn't it? Right? There's always something rotten going on. You know? Oh, look, there's the guy. Anyway, sorry. Good thing he's kind of like the comic relief there, right? Like just when things are the worst, it's like, oh, hello. Anyway, sorry, my husband might have to cut that before we put this online because we don't know if this guy really wanted to be part of my webinar or not. So anyway, all right. Thanks for understanding, everyone. I did like this picture very much. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so this brings us back to this cosmic wave. And I actually thought it might be interesting to do a little exercise to help everyone sort of clue in with it. And the point is that the whole creation is moving in all these waves. As I alluded to earlier, there are bigger waves and there are smaller waves. So we could, if we just for a moment close the eyes and bring attention to the physiology, we can for a moment feel that cosmic wave that my friend refers to when she's massaging people. She tunes into that cosmic wave. And what we'll find is, if we do a little scan, that there are lots of cyclic patterns in the physiology. If you feel carefully, you'll probably be able to feel your pulse. Certainly, it's easy to feel the in and out breath. With the in and out breath, there is a natural pumping of cerebral spinal fluid up and down the spine. As we breathe in, it pushes down. As we breathe out, the cerebral spinal fluid releases up. Lots of nice cycles within the physiology. Lots of long, old cycles too, right? The way the seasons slowly change as they move around the year. But this habit that we're plucking it out of the collective consciousness, and we're also dissolving it from our own physiologies, going back for centuries through ancestors, is the tendency to think that wherever we are in this divine dialogue with regards to life circumstances is the default mode. That's where we are. And that it's not going to change. There's a certain level, there's the small cycles that we just looked at in our physiologies, right? And then there are like the bigger cycles, like the change of the seasons and the course of a lifespan and all that. But then there's this kind of like middle range of cycles that we experience more through our interactions with other people, in our relationships. And in that level of the cycles, there's a tendency to get a little stuck. There's a tendency to develop blind spots that allow us to deal with whatever the point that we're at that moment, to just deal with that and kind of like not look at the whole divine dialogue, not be looking at the whole thing, just that one spot. And particularly this point as the old is dissolving down and is going back into the field of silence, there's a tendency for pain bodies to get stuck right there. And I'm seeing it particularly in larger collectives, you know, in America, in the West, we're living in fairly high levels of comfort. Everybody's got computers and cell phones and this and that. But there are countries, there are places in the world where people are a little more limited in their access to resources. So in some of these places, people are experiencing more grief over the loss of the access to their personal power. And it's not just reflected in the fact that in some places people are living a lower quality of life. It's also, I mean, that's one way that it reflects, but it's also reflecting because the reality is that we have countries in our world that are still trying to dig themselves out of horrific events over the course of the last century. And in those locations, there's a certain level of struggle that's held in the collective. And as you all know, as we all know, one of the values of our webinars is to be able to promote healing effects, not just for ourselves personally, but for the whole collective. Something I can do it some on my own, but boy, with you guys, we are just like, such a powerful force. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm grateful to everyone. I'm grateful. So, clearing pain bodies at the point of collapse, going into the silence. Because as what was known and what we were familiar with starts to devolve and move into an unmanifest condition, there's a certain amount of grief. There's a certain feeling of being bereft of a stable foundation or a context for understanding reality. That's why we had to have that healing for that download for the heart earlier. Because that download for the heart provides a context for all the different phases of the divine dialogue, all the different conditions or states that we find ourselves in, so that whatever state we're in, we're seeing it in context of the whole cycle of expression of nature. Big ones and little ones. It's unsticking the tendency to identify only with whatever point in this cycle of behavior we're in at the moment. It's unsticking it. So that whatever point you're in, it's always in the context of the whole. That means if we have an interaction with somebody we love and it's rotten, it doesn't mean that that's the new standard for that relationship, right? It means that something was breaking down, something was unmanifesting, something was requiring a reset. And so I'm still seeing, okay, so let me finish one sentence at a time, thank you. By being able to maintain the context, the whole context, no matter where we are in that relationship or where we are in that interaction with the other person, that's the first step in providing a foundation for being able to move with grace and to transition through the more difficult parts of the interaction. So that's number one. Number two is eliminating pain bodies, because what I'm seeing in the collective is there's a tendency for people to get pain bodies kind of stuck at certain points in the divine dialogue, in the cycle of the evolutionary process. And one of those points is at the very deepest point of the collapse, right before the silence. Once we get into the silence, the reset has already begun. But before the silence, like at that very last flop of the wave, I'm seeing pain bodies, I'm seeing fear, I'm seeing a lot of self-doubt, I'm seeing impressions from the past. And these impressions are born of those times that any one of us decided, oh, that's a problem, well, I'll just avoid it. No. We can't just run away. Runaway doesn't solve the problem. It only makes it worse. So, and runaway taken to its extreme is suicide, right? Just doing a little fine adjustment with those beautiful angelic energies and that glorious awakening of understanding of the laws of nature of this reality for individuals who have chosen the ultimate runaway. What's happening is a very big integration of the entire cycle of the manifesting process, the entire divine dialogue, the entire cosmic wave, however we want to describe it. wholeness, if we take the whole wave in one shot and bring the energy signature of the totality of that whole cycle into every point in the cycle, which is basically what we were doing for our own healing just a minute ago. I'm just describing it from another angle now. But if we do that, it is possible to open a recognition of what needs to be healed in the relationship between the indweller and the physiology, which brings us to this point that I wanted to, that was one of the points that came up earlier, like, oh, you should talk about this. So this webinar is about healing relationships. And when we think of relationships, we think of relationships with other people. However, we all know that our relationships with other people are founded on our relationship with ourselves. And a lot of times people have blind spots in the relationship with one's own self. And one of those I've noticed is that a lot of us, myself included until fairly recently, will tend to drive ourselves around in our bodies like you drive a car, right? Like, this is my vehicle and I'm driving it around. I want to go over here and I want to eat this and I want to, now I want to sit down, now I want to sleep. It's like we're kind of driving it around like it's this convenient vehicle in which we reside. Another download for the heart coming in right now. Think of it. Think of the focus of attention, which is what we use for energy healing, to include the quality of recognition. Recognition. What do we recognize? Where do we not have blind spots? What do we recognize in the physiology? It's like a diamond, right? If it's hanging around the neck and you don't know what a diamond is, it's just a weight, and you can't wait to rip that thing off of there. But if you recognize that it is a valuable gemstone, then every time you feel the weight of it, you're like, oh, this beautiful thing. Like, thank you for being with me, and thank you for letting me recognize you, for knowing that you exist here. How to promote a relationship between the field of consciousness and the fully manifested physical aspect, expression of self, which, because it's in this world, and thank you that everybody got that download about the laws of nature of this world always has these little imperfections in it. Always has little something something going on that's not perfect. I'm just feeling the downloads coming through in like a tidal wave right now. So as it comes through, as you know, my job is to describe to the best of my ability. So thank you, everyone, for bearing with me as I examine the silence. The body is basically unfiltered. It knows itself to be completely integrated form within the context of this whole universe. Completely integrated. No blind spots. No blind spots. The blind spots come in the relationship. Every time consciousness transcends thought, every time consciousness experiences silence, the intelligence of the body, which heals the body, is given basically a carte blanche to come forward and to do any degree or amount of healing that you need. We don't always realize it. Many of us have been having the experience of transcending thought for a really long time, and it wasn't until extremely recently that it occurred to me, and I've been doing this since I was like young, like decades, 4 or 5 decades I've been doing this. It didn't occur to me till recently that every time the transcendental state is there, the full capacity, the full healing capacity of the physiology is able to kick into gear. Why I didn't realize it for decades was because I didn't recognize that it was happening. So it's like this huge privilege and joy for me to just to tell you, to share this point with you. This is, you've got a diamond hanging around. Do you realize that's a diamond? Do you realize that's like a super valuable? That every time awareness drops into the gap of silence, that gap of silence that sits between every thought, that sits between waking and dreaming and sleep state, that sits within the soul of every experience, the entire force of the body's healing capacity comes online, and it is present, and it is able to engage and do tremendous work in a very, very short period of time. Even if your experience of silence between two thoughts is a very tiny silence, a huge amount of healing can take place in that little gap. Vast. It's vast. And this is why we did the exercise earlier. It is the movement of these intelligences in the body. I'm like trying to avoid using the word deva, but anyway, basically, Devic healing potential of the physiology, that the engagement of this intelligence is experienced as that scintillating pulsation of life force in the body, right? Remember, we all closed our eyes a minute ago and we felt it. And now we know that that's not just my blood pumping through my body. That's not just the air breathing in and out. There's also other deeper, finer levels of pulsation of life force in the body. And that is the very soul of your own healing potential, functioning to promote balance, to purify out toxins and impurities, and to protect your physiology from anything which would not support your highest evolution. Now you know. Now it can be way more useful. Why? Because this is about relationship. We have a relationship with that level of our own intelligence. We have a relationship, the indweller, the self, the knower, the seer, the being. It interacts with its own intelligence. This is divinity self-interacting in the same way we interact with people we love. If you know that those impulses or scintillating energy that you experience in your body is the awakened Devic intelligence, which is healing you, then appreciation, gratitude, love, just like any other relationship, then those emotions start to interface with that process that's taking place in the body, and the result is way, 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 way more powerful healing, way more powerful integration of relationship within one's own being, divinity self-interacting. It starts to unfold as a direct experience, whereas before maybe it was not recognized at all, or maybe it was only understood intellectually. Now this formula is the key for actually promoting a complete integration of this divine dialogue process, this divinity self-interacting with itself in the physiology all the time. See how beautiful you are? Good, good, everybody. Good stuff. All right. I promise that I take questions at the end. Looks like there's not like a huge number of questions coming in, and I did actually want to talk about relationships between people a little bit. Usually, I know you all know, those who have been with me a lot, you know that usually the Friday night session is kind of like the setup for the Saturday session, so we'll probably bring everything home tomorrow. But I did want to address some relationships. And I'm thinking actually this one, thank you. Thank you, darling. One question that came up from a really brilliant woman in Ogden, Utah, who's a mother of 5 children, among other things. So, she's got a world full of complex relationships that she's dealing with. She sent in this really awesome question. It was kind of like she fired forth about, several questions at once, all of which I feel would be a great launching point to talk a little bit more specifically about relationships. So, one of the things she's doing, she's taking my advice, and instead of just meeting problem situations with taking it on the chin and being silent, she's starting to speak a little bit. So if something isn't working, she's willing to kind of come forward and take the chance of maybe offending somebody and saying, hey, that didn't work for me. Oh, look, I have a boundary here. I would rather that you don't step across it, like that. So good. I'm very proud of her. It's hard for moms to do that sometimes, right? Okay, however, she notices that sometimes, even though she tries to say her truth in a very kind of calm and logical manner, it still seems like sometimes people's feelings get hurt. So the first reason this can happen is that if you have established a particular type of relationship with the people around you where you are exploited and they get whatever they want out of you, then if you start to say, no, I think actually I want to restructure the power in our relationship so that I also can say no sometimes, that sometimes people feel, they don't feel comfortable with that. So it's okay if that happens, because in the end, it requires the people in your world to rise up and be responsible in their own right and find their own means of dealing with challenges themselves. So rather than you taking on everybody's challenge and handling it by just self-sacrificing, you set a few boundaries, and it may make people feel a little annoyed in the short run, but in the long run, they will appreciate you. She doesn't want to hurt the people she loves the most, of course. We never want to hurt people. And as long as you give your truth in a way which is like very genuine, and it doesn't even have to be like the truth. This is important. Relationships are based on honesty. And honesty is based on being truthful with people, right? But the thing is, it doesn't have to be like the overall truth, like your truth plus their truth plus everybody else's truth all put together in one big truth. It just has to be your truth at that moment. And you bring it out, and if it works for people, great. And if it doesn't work for people, then maybe a dialogue opens up. And we start to talk about it. And then this is the best part, is when that type of dialogue opens up, what happens is between you and the other person who maybe wasn't easy with your truth, they weren't comfortable with it, you are able to, when there's love there, when you love them, don't worry if they love you or not. It doesn't matter if they love you or not. When the love is there on your side, what happens is the dialogue gives rise to a refinement or a deepening of the understanding of what that truth, what your truth really is, and what their truth really is. And what you'll find is once you get to a certain level of depth or refinement, the result is a bigger truth for both of you. And then it's like high five, we found something together. We like an archaeological dig, right? You get down to the nugget of commonality or unity between yourself and the other person. And then what's happened is divinity has integrated in your relationship with that person. It has established itself, not just on the level of you as an individual and them as an individual, but also on the collective of both of you. Once you've come to a level of understanding like that with another person, there are a lot of things you probably won't have to talk with them about anymore, because you just both know. It's very beautiful. It's like, it's a way of interacting with other people that allows for the birth of new knowledge. And essentially, we're kind of doing that in these webinars too, even though it's kind of a one-sided dialogue, I realize. But from my own side, I'm doing my best to balance my own expressions off of everybody's experience. So thank you all for your contributions. I really appreciate it. Okay, next part of her question. Why can't I feel the love they send me? There are two reasons for this. One is you only feel your own love, right? When you love somebody, your heart melts, your heart explodes, your heart is full, and maybe they get a nice meal, or maybe you say some nice words to them, or your attention, or whatever, but you're the one who feels the love. One of the laws of nature of our world is that there really is only divinity loving itself. And we're all expressions, we're all like taking part in that process in our own way. So what happens is the love rises up through any single antenna of creation. So through any one of us, the love rises up, and then it propagates out into the field of creation in some way or another, even if you don't say anything, even if you just quietly love in the background or from a distance or whatever. Your love propagates. And then what happens is it bounces off of all the features and aspects and structures in your world, and it comes back to you reflected through those forms. And each one of those forms is like a kind of a filter. So each one reflects your love back to you from a particular specific angle. So what it does is it gives you a chance to experience that wave of love from a level which you cannot really fully describe. And then it allows it to come back to you in forms that you can describe. That process is integrative. That process stabilizes and anchors your experience. One of the guys who's on this session tonight sent me this fabulous quote from Black Elk. Black Elk said, "I understand more than I can say, and I experience more than I can understand." Nice quote. I'm going to say it again. I understand more than I can say, and I experience more than I can understand. Black Elk. So this is how love is. Love is one of those features of our reality which connects us with everyone, connects us with everything. And it is something which is experienced first. And we only really understand it, we only really understand our experience when it starts coming back to us, when it starts reflecting back from, oh, beautiful. Oh, and then another beautiful quote coming up here from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, love is that which binds the boundless. Beautiful. So we start to understand it when we see it reflected back. Then we actually see it from two different angles. It's like having two eyes open, right? If you're just looking at it with one eye, you can only understand so much, but if you felt the initial wave, and then you see the initial wave reflected back from the other side, and then you get to see it from two different perspectives. I know we're going to have to go into that more tomorrow, that whole premise of the way people process their life experience after death. We need to go into that, and I think we need to do a big healing for it. I don't think we have time tonight because we've got a couple more questions, but when it comes back, then one makes a stab at describing it. So, why can't I feel the love they send to me? Because you feel your own love, but what you get from them are nice things, you know, like a smile or a kiss or a recognition or She's still trying to figure out how for other people not to be hurt by her words. She's saying maybe if she could feel other people's love, then they wouldn't be hurt by her words. We can't be responsible for the way other people respond to truth. They have to learn, everyone has to learn to deal with the unknown in a way which is successful. And as a mother, and you remember my email response was that as a mother, you're presenting some of the harder lessons to them, to your family, to your kids, but from the loving heart of a mother. Whereas if they don't learn to deal with that challenge now, they'll have to learn to do it later from, say, their boss, when maybe their job is on the line, or from a teacher, or from who may give them a bad grade in a class for whatever reason or whatever. But when they're going through a difficult lesson with you as the point of reference, the result is that as difficult as it may be, it still is an easier lesson, and it's more comfortable for them to integrate it than if they were trying to deal with it later on down the road when their own habits are more set in, etc. All right, I hope that helps. Thank you for the awesome question. Okay, we've got a question here from the live audience. We've got a question here online, and we have plenty of time. Oh, she says, I appreciate hearing, oh, this is just a comment. The lady online is saying that she appreciates hearing the Vedic and the Vedic terms and the Sanskrit terms for these expressions of intelligence, if I want to include them. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We all know that Sanskrit has the value of being completely integrated with regards to the vibrational quality of the syllables and of the consonants and vowels and whatever it is they're describing. So we know everything has a kind of an energy value or an energy form, like my earring. My earring has an energy form. The Sanskrit word for jewelry is alankara, and the word alankara means to make sufficient. What it does is it gives expression to a more, see how the light has a sort of scintillating effect as it reflects off the little dangly things on my earring. Like that, my being, my energy body has qualities that are just like that scintillating light. In fact, we were all experiencing it in ourselves earlier, right, when we did the exercise. So it adds a little something, a little embellishment that gives expression to what's the true reality of the being, which is it's made of energy and scintillating light, divine form. All right, alankara. It also means the embellishments in music, right? Okay. How can we heal others even if we heal ourselves? What about those that aren't open? Oh, what about those who are not open? That's a really good question. That is a really good question. Okay. And the first part of the question is, how can we heal others even if we heal ourselves?
You sort of explained that already.
When we're healing ourselves?
But this really goes into the second part, is if somebody's not open and we are healing ourselves, how is that?
Okay, that's a great question. And I really appreciate it coming at this point in the webinar, because it ties into that last bit that we were talking about, the Davic intelligence of the body. If we can go back to the diamond analogy for a moment. If you're wearing a diamond and you know it's of great value, and somebody else sees the diamond, but they don't know, they just think it's a little stupid thing. The question is, how much good does it do for them? How much good can it do? If you don't know the diamond is worth anything and they don't know the diamond is worth anything, it may as well be sitting in a trash heap somewhere. But if you know the diamond is worth something and they don't know it's worth something, then your knowledge of that, even if it remains unspoken, it has an effect regarding the way you interact with that diamond. You will feel differently about the diamond because you know it's valuable. And if you don't know, then it's not going to have the same effect. So what happens is the effect is subtle for the other person. It's my perception, and thank you for the wording of this question too. It's my perception that we don't really heal other people. It's not my experience, not my experience that I heal you or I heal other people. It's my experience that divine intelligence is self-interacting. It both promotes the imbalance that arises in the first place, and then it promotes the means by which that imbalance is eliminated. And it does that as part of that stroke of transformation that occurs in order to integrate divinity in an ever more increasingly refined manner into the relative. So it is possible to support evolutionary transformation in others. A little bit through that way I kind of described it with the diamond analogy, that when you're humming or resonating in a state of tremendous internal transformation and great force of healing energy moving through your own physiology, and you're like Our Lady in Ogden, speaking your truth, then what happens is your ability to verbalize that which is beyond understanding or beyond, right? Your ability to give a voice to that which for somebody else is just a field of chaos actually can be very helpful for them. Because if your understanding and your experience are nicely organized and set, and you can speak it, then your ability to speak it shines the light of understanding for somebody else. And that field of language, just like now in the webinar, right? The tool of language is powerful enough to wash away misunderstandings, imbalances. In relationships, when we hold pain in our hearts, or we hold ourselves back from expressing, giving expression to areas that need some transformation or change, we really don't do ourselves or the other people with whom we're interacting any favor. So I definitely encourage everyone to be bold and use your cold anger, as we've talked about cold anger in the previous webinars. Use your cold anger skills of high level of discernment, followed with the presentation with a measured regularity. So you basically break the message down into digestible pieces and then present it sequentially to the person that you're speaking to. And that allows them to process the information in a way that doesn't create too much stress in their systems. And if it's something they don't like, maybe you guys can dialogue a little bit about that and get to a deeper level of understanding. Thank you for the question. Oh, I'm glad. I hope it helped. Okay, here's another question. For such a long time, I've been intrigued by the blind spots. I know, in our human eyes. Oh yeah, like the place where the occipital nerve connects to the back of the eyeball, right? So there's like a little blind, everybody's eye has a blind spot in it, right? So for such a long time, she was intrigued by the blind spots in the human eyes. Our physical bodies are such marvelous creations, I know, right? Why would there be deliberate blind spots? What evolutionary purpose does that serve? The only thing I can think of is that purpose of blind spots to ensure that we really on others, that we rely on others and cooperate together in relationships. Oh, that's such a beautiful idea. What do you think? I think it's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. Nice. Thanks for the brilliant question. Another reason why I think that the blind spots are there is it allows us to break down the cyclic flow of transformation so that we're just looking at this part of it, and then we're just looking at that part, then we're just looking at that part, then we're just looking at that part and that part, like that, to look at each section one at a time without being distracted by the whole picture in order to more deeply understand the nature of that cyclic flow. But I think there comes a point when enough is enough, kind of, that that we've been through the cycle enough times that there's a value in seeing the point in the context of wholeness. So that's to a large degree what we're doing here. And the first steps of doing that, I believe, do occur in our interactions with other people. Because each of us, we're all together collectively in the context of this flow, right? Like, you know, here it is November. So, you know, we're all in November right now, but for some of us, we also have these smaller cycles within that bigger cycle. And if I'm at this point in the cycle and I'm only seeing what's happening in the collapse, I might have a family member who's at this point in the cycle where they're sitting in the silence and they're seeing the picture from silence. And I might have another friend or family member who's at some point of the coming forth of the new reality. And so together, as we interact together, we get a vision of the trajectory of that particular evolutionary transformation. I have to go back to the question again. So the blind spots do, but I think your analysis, this is a lady from Texas, I think your analysis is spot on, that really in the long run, it does ultimately support our ability or our need almost as individuals to maintain harmonious relationships with other people, because if we love and accept each other with our blind spots, then we can fill in for each other those blind spots. And then a big picture comes up. Thank you. It's a great, great question. Can you comment on how our relationships with loved ones continue after they die? Yes, I really wanted to talk about, this was another kind of download that I got, and I really wanted to talk about this. Although we're just out of time. Oh, and it's such an interesting question. I'm wondering, I love you guys dearly. If you're going to be with me tomorrow morning, I'm wondering if I could address this question tomorrow, because it needs some time to elaborate. But I would like, in a word, because the question is here now, and for those who won't be with me tomorrow, I would like to say, absolutely, relationships do not stop. They do not stop when somebody dies. The physicality of it, of course, you can't hold them in your arms, you can't sit down and share a meal with them like that. That part doesn't continue. But the relationship does continue, and evolution continues in the relationship. But it's a really, really fascinating process, the way relationships transmute or transform themselves across the veil. So, and it also relates to this point that we were talking about today of being able to see our reality from the context of wholeness. So I'd like to just end with that, just saying that yes, relationships definitely continue. Oh, thank you, dears. They said thank you, tomorrow's fine. Thank you. Yeah, so definitely continue that one tomorrow, because that's a very yummy field of exploration, and well worth exploring together. So thank you all very much for your perspectives on tonight's webinar on relationships. I am sincerely grateful for our time together, and I feel as if we always end up evolving new knowledge together, which is brilliant. It is precious. It is golden. It is our diamond. So thank you. Thank you all so much for being with me. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with everyone tomorrow, 11 o'clock Central Standard Time. Thank you, everyone. Lots of comments of love coming in through the comments box. Thank you. Beautiful. See you all soon. Bye. To do a brief review of what is energy healing, and then to dive into a brief review of what we did yesterday, because yesterday's live webinar was laid the foundation for today's session. And then we'll dive into today's session. We've got lots of juicy questions and suggestions up online today to help support an amazing session today, and hopefully some really deep, incredible healings for everybody with regards to relationships. All right, what is energy healing? Energy healing is the process of using attention to affect change or transformation in the field of the relative. And in energy healing, one of the points that came up last night is we're working with the concept of attention partly in terms of recognition, and how important that value of attention is, that recognizing value of attention. Because we're all, no matter what level of expansion of consciousness a person is at, or no matter what their level of expansion of consciousness, no matter what their refinement of perception, no matter where they are in their evolutionary process, everyone is actually getting everything. We're all experiencing everything. We're all on the same human ship, basically. We're all on the human ship. And here is where we access the junction between the divine source of creation and its manifestation at a relative level. So that's primarily and principally what being a human is all about. We're working that junction. We're working that relationship. We're looking at it. We're experiencing it. So recognition is the difference between kind of blindly going through life, not really knowing what's going on, or actually realizing what we're doing, actually having that sense of awakened awareness to what's happening. Recognition. So we talked a little bit yesterday about the value of recognition, particularly in relationship to the body, to how we interact with our bodies, and realizing the tremendous healing effect which is continuously in play in the human body all the time, and that when it's recognized, a flow of appreciation and gratitude and love moves through the whole system and integrates with that healing effect that's taking place. Like really every second, right? We're digesting food, and we're repairing, building new skin cells, and growing new hairs, and doing all kinds of good things all the time. But it's not necessary to waste life getting absorbed into a particular skin cell which is being reborn at a particular moment. But it is valuable to have that flow of deep, loving appreciation, gratitude, and recognition to the intelligences of the body that are actually paying attention to each skin cell. Those intelligences are lively aspects of one's own inner landscape. So it's what's happening, the value of recognition is comes into play by folding awareness back into those particular aspects of one's own intelligence, which are responsible for, capable of, and engaged in the repair and renewal and rejuvenation of the physiology. Then, as those structures of one's own intelligence are working, they're also being fed by your love. They're being fed by your appreciation. And that actually creates good timing, actually. That creates a foundation for much more sophisticated, profound, and efficient healing overall. All right. So that was one of the points that we covered yesterday, and I encourage everyone to check out yesterday's yesterday's video, because we did a little exercise in there as well, where we put some attention on something I'd like to speak about a little bit more today, and that was called the cosmic tide. Last night I was trying to remember the name, and I was calling it the cosmic wave, but my girlfriend actually calls it the cosmic tide. And I like the word tide because tide indicates or references something which doesn't end and which is a phenomenon of nature. And so it makes more sense to call it the cosmic tide. And so the cosmic tide is another word to describe the divine dialogue, which you've heard me talk about before. But in this case, we looked at it in terms of blind spots in the field of awareness, because I discovered that there's this natural tendency in all of us to be very much in that point in the tide process. Wherever if you go to walk on the beach and the tide is coming in, it's like you're all about the tide coming in. You're walking and it's coming in, right? It's about halfway in, and there's this like very clear awareness. This is where we're at right now. And if you're walking on the beach and the tide is full out, is going out, then that's where the awareness is. And the value is that this helps maintain a point of perspective in the human experience, in the human process of interfacing with the divine manifestation, which is going on all the time. But without the recognition, we only recognizing the tide where it is at that exact moment. And what I've noticed is for some people, there's a tendency to fall back on that as the default. Oh, the tide is coming in. Well, the tide always does that, right? That's the default mode. That's where the tide seems like every time I walk on the beach, it's coming in. I don't know. So, but the reality is that the recognition element, which is actually, even as I'm saying it, is awakening and enlivening for everybody. We're sort of starting to wake up that recognition. In other words, the causal body is starting to hum with the quality or the resonation of recognition. It supports the ability, no matter where the tide is, that there's that awareness, this is where the tide is, and then this is the whole trajectory of the tide. So that the understanding of the momentary experience is always in perspective with wholeness, always in the perspective of wholeness. And what I'm seeing happening for some people in this session is that this is also being integrated and understood, particularly the recognition in the junction between the astral and the causal levels of the physiology, that area I've referred to as the mist, where the threads or streams of the web of life become so delicate and so fine that they look more like a very fine fabric, like a misty fabric, than they do like actual threads of consciousness. And in that level of the field of being, the formulas for understanding the mechanics of the way divinity manifests as the relative are contained, and they're complete in that area. So it's beautiful that recognition quality, which has been rising, first it starts in the field of pure unmanifest being, it rises up through the causal level of self, and at the causal level, whatever resonates there, it resonates through the whole field. You've heard me talk about causal body organs or causal body structures, where the consciousness gets inside the structure and it reverberates back and forth through that structure. But you have to understand, at the causal level of creation, it's not like the rooms in a house. We're used to things that are so manifest, right? So we're thinking in terms of what we know, but at the causal level, it's the whole field of self is so abstract that even though we create specific constraints that cause consciousness to vibrate in a particular manner, the vibration fills the field. Everything is a field effect. Everything at the causal level is a field effect. Even the constraints that you set for yourself in the causal field, those constraints or boundaries are also a field effect. That's why, as a collective, we have so many we have such a long tradition of legendary understandings of the nature of humanity, like archetypal forms like the goddess and the priest and the warrior and the acolyte, and the long lists of different forms that are common to everyone. These archetypal forms are expressions, they're kind of like animated expressions of the structures in the causal field. All right, that's a lot of theory, but anyway, we need to do some healings too. But and of course, working with the principle of today's webinar, which is relationships. I just want to, before we go too far, I want to come back to this junction point between the causal field and the astral field, where the complexities or the specifics of the mechanics of manifestation are understood in terms of formulas, and how our ability to recognize that that's what's happening at that level supports the particular aspects of each person's intelligence, which is responsible for understanding the manifesting process at such a level of detail, at such a powerful level of understanding that the interface between individuality and the divine, the divinity, which is in its constant flow of manifesting, that interface is all lit up. We just want it all lit up. We want it awake. Another thing that happened yesterday, since we're still kind of reviewing yesterday's session, was there was a healing that integrated, and I think that was related to the heart, was integrating a particular type of angelic capabilities in all of us as a group. And I wanted to come back to that today because there was a thread that came out that I'd like to pick up and complete, that like didn't get a chance to fully resolve. What happened was this beautiful healing, which everybody's receiving now as a download. And there were lots of downloads with that healing. You can go back and watch the whole thing in detail. But the important thing was that as a group, as a collective, we were able to hold a space on the level of consciousness which had a tremendously pure angelic quality to it. Very life-supporting on many, many levels. And as we were holding that space as a collective, as we are now, it integrates more and more of the physiology, of course, nourishing and waking up those body devas that I was just talking about, so that as we're doing this work, our own healing resources are working in a much more efficient and I would say resourceful manner. They're nourished as they work. They're nourished as they work. The work becomes bliss and it becomes more powerful. But this little thread that didn't quite get resolved yesterday was that at the same time our group is able to kind of like lock in place this healing structure, which is our ability to integrate and hold angelic energies so that great beneficial effects can be promoted. At the same time, what was happening was illumination of locations around the world where there are collectives of people that are kind of, we could say, sort of like they're holding the opposite of that. That there are collectives around the world that are experiencing repression from their governments or or from other kinds of social or cultural circumstances which are causing the collectives in those areas to feel bereft of their power, to feel, I get emails from people all the time who are like doing good in various parts of the world, and they'll send pictures of how people are living in these, very poverty-stricken conditions with terrible illnesses and no access to any medical support, and long lists of terrible suffering that is going on at a collective level. And so I'm not saying that the people in those areas are consciously manifesting some kind of dark experience for themselves, but that the souls at this time are in that situation enough that we can just say they're in that situation. And so, and they're large areas, they're like whole countries that are being sort of held down by depression and that sort of thing. It's very sad. So what I wanted to do was just support the strengthening of our beautiful, bright, highly evolved, powerful, collective capacity to promote waves and waves, to use the cosmic tide, okay, to use that cycle of the divine dialogue to leverage whatever's happening, whether it's on the destructive side of the cycle or the creative side of the cycle. In those countries where people are really struggling, they're kind of gripped into this destructive side of their cycle, to leverage that for the sake of highest evolution. So I'm just looking at that for a minute, especially because we have this mechanic that, oh, thank you. Do you think that'll get rid of some of the flashy stuff? Okay, cool. Got a little technical improvements going on here. That was not a coincidence. I was just going to say, as our collective, we've got it on the feeling level, that sense of recognizing and loving and appreciating that quality of our own being, which has this capacity to create so much good. And then at the same time, understanding the very fine mechanics between the causal and astral levels of the physiology, where the details of how the manifesting process occurs in a formulaic manner. So that means thinking of it in terms of like mathematical formulas. Oh, that's worse. Oh, thank you. That's better. Or, yeah, mathematical formulas, or Vedic cognition. That's another way to look at it, Vedic cognition. Anybody who's hearing the tones, you're getting it on the level of Vedic cognition there. Beautiful. All right. I think that light would have to come back here if you want my opinion, but that would create a lot of havoc behind me while I'm in the middle of the webinar. So perhaps we won't. Perhaps we'll just enjoy a little bit of shadow. A little bit of shadow.
Well, we are in the shadow part of the retrograde.
Right, right. We're in the shadow part of the retrograde, and we're also looking into very shadowish elements in the collective consciousness of the earth right now. We're not even going back through time so much, although it does, one of the points from yesterday was that those countries that are held down right now are being held down because of, to a large degree, because of events over the last century. Very intense, some of the genocides and various things that were going on in parts of the world. We're all connected. So in those areas, what's happening is I'm just looking, was more and more lights are being lit around me. I'm looking at that's better. I'm looking at the junction between the causal and astral bodies, and I'm deciphering out the specific formulas which are responsible for healing the imbalances which are born of a sense of a feeling, a collective sense of being exploited or victimized or bereft of personal power, etc., etc., etc. Corruption at high levels of administration. And so that beautiful, what's happening, okay, beautiful. So this is an upgrade for astral bodies, for people in those places, and for our astral bodies as well, because we want everyone to be strong, right? And what happens in the astral body is the outer edge, or the outer layer of the astral body takes on this wonderful reflective quality that it can, that whatever is that corruption that's coming through and is penetrating into the inner levels of the physiology, it cannot do that. This reflective energy is, the quality of reflection is part of the nature of the divine dialogue. It keeps reflecting its own pattern over and over and over again. So reflection is easy. Reflection is everywhere. It's at every point in creation. And so whatever is the source or the origin of the corruption that is responsible for holding people, masses of people in some difficult situation for the sake of the over too much excess benefit on the part of a few, right there, that's just being reflected. It's just being reflected back, deflected, 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 deflected. And at the same time, there is an upgrade for everybody whose astral bodies are all, who are being upgraded of, the upgrade is to own, totally own the habit of responding to difficulty with courage and confidence and openness, of enthusiasm for walking into the unknown. Enthusiasm, enthusiasm, enthusiasm. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. There's a lot clearing. There's a lot clearing. Many, many, many layers are clearing. Many layers are clearing. Many layers are clearing. Many layers. It's a collective. It's held in the collective. And I talked about that yesterday. 2 different ways of dealing with challenges. One is don't deal with the challenge, just go do something else. And the other way, and the other way is to deal with it. And guess what? It turns out that if you deal with it, that's actually a better way to deal with it than not dealing with it. Yeah, but it's not the most common. It's not the most common. So I'm just holding what we're doing. The angelic energies of our being have this ability to work by tiny particle by tiny particle by tiny particle like that, and it's going through the psyches and the hearts and the intentions and the mostly the 4 denser levels of the physiologies of people in these areas where people are experiencing a lot of repression, and supporting the ability to feel empowered to deal with their challenges. And to move, to favor that. Oh, this is a difficult situation. Okay, how can I rise to meet it like that? How can I rise? How can I rise? And that's what angelic energies do, right? They're like really high frequency, and they lift up. Whatever is down, it lifts. So it's a lifting, and it's a lifting that's going in particle by particle by particle through the hearts and minds and physiologies. And as that happens, it's creating a cosmic tide, which is moving back through the generations, and it is uplifting. It's almost like a kind of a scintillating or almost searing, it's like a light of truth that's the driving force behind this healing, and it's moving back through the generations, and it's restructuring habits, ancestral habits, as well as habits of people in the present time. And the other part of this healing is that it's also, there's this light of upliftment that's being propagated through the field of creation by our group, and at the same time integrating into our physiologies, is founded on the light of truth, basically. And so one of the things that's happening is there were a lot of really fine meridians, I would say, threads in the web of life that were blocked up with, looks like illusion, mostly illusion. But it created a kind of another friend offered this term, the web of deception. It created a kind of a web that was overlaying the web of life, that was disallowing the flow of knowledge and truth and wisdom to move. And so that is clearing, and it's clearing so effortlessly through the flow of our attention. Beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I expect that we will see changes. I know I've got people who are in, because today is the day that most of the Europeans are here with me. So, and I know that a lot of the Europeans are monitoring what's going on in some of these countries that have been held down by the weight of the events in their area over the last century. So even over the last few decades. So now we can look to see how the transformation is affecting all of that. Thank you everyone for being awesome and for being part of this process, this structure that we've created, which we've now like put into motion, set into motion, continues to have its own course of support for the whole creation. So we're always part of this great angelic collective. All of us are, always now. A lot of good is happening. All right. Now, you know, I usually take questions at the end, but we ended yesterday's session with a very interesting and compelling question about relationships with those who are no longer with us. And so I wanted to be sure to address that. And also I see some more questions coming in here. I'm just making sure. Okay. There's a question there. Oh, and here's also a question, if I would please comment more on the tones and Vedic cognition. Well, thank you for asking that beautiful question. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I would like to do that. And I actually have a whole video, I think, that's on YouTube about it. But let us explore that for a minute because it is accessible to everyone right now. The cosmic tide, actually we did a little exercise for this yesterday. And for those who were with me yesterday, then maybe it's a repeat, but it doesn't hurt to do it again because every time the experience will be a little bit different, okay? So you can use this exercise anytime you like. But the principle here is that there's a wave-like process, a tide-like process that's occurring at every level and every dimension of creation. And we can clue into it physically. God bless our amazing physiologies, right? And thank you to the ancestors by closing the eyes, putting attention on the body, the physical body. Attention on the body reveals the flow of energy in the body. You might be able to discriminate out the in and out breaths. Oh, that's easy, right? But the in and out breaths also pump the cerebral spinal fluid up and down the spine. So see if you can feel that. When you breathe in, the spinal fluid goes down. You breathe out, the spinal fluid goes up. Sorry, did I say down and up? We breathe in, it goes up. Breathe out, it goes down. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was too. I said, wait a minute, that's not my experience. Thank you. So yeah, the cerebral spinal fluid, but also the heart pumping, right? That's a cycle. And that cycle is scintillating through the whole physiology because it's not actually the muscle of the heart that makes the blood pump through the entire physiology. It's actually an effect that's produced in the veins and arteries themselves. I mean, the heart also helps, of course. I'm going to sneeze. Oh, you can see the guy when I sneeze. Oh, there's a guy in the phone. Okay, sorry. He's our comic relief, all right? It's a great cave, man. We all want to live there someday. Anyway, yeah, so just feeling that tide of inner outer strokes, those waves of self. And within those, there are other waves, smaller waves and larger waves. The ears are able to hear humming or a buzzing sound. And what most people notice, at least the people I've talked to about this, most people notice that they hear the humming or buzzing sound with a lot more detail when the awareness settles down. They start to settle down to fall asleep at night, or they start to settle down to meditate, or they're in some kind of deep resting mode. And there's this sort of, there's a humming or a pitch And I'm just going to listen to it for a second. So for me, the pitch is here, only it's multiple octaves up. So it's very sweet. That's the first layer of the pitch that I'm hearing. I'm also hearing within that pitch a scintillating sound, like it's like vibrating sound. And so it's almost like it doesn't quite make it into a buzz. And there's another lower sound that's moving at a deeper level that's kind of gently rolling through. About there. And the reason I'm exempling what I'm hearing is that I've noticed that when we listen together, we generally tend to hear the same pitches at the same time. I've done a lot of, I've had fun playing with my friends. We play together and we listen to the sounds. And the beauty of these Vedic sounds is that when the awareness, the recognition is on them, also recognition or realization of deeper truths is also present. You'll notice that when you're hearing the sounds, you will also have experiences that support the evolutionary process, such as the answers to questions, or recognizing something beautiful around you that you hadn't seen before, or a feeling of naturalness or a feeling of easiness in the body. There are many different forms that the humming or vibrating of these sounds can take. But what I realized over time was that this humming resonance is actually the sound of the life force as it flows. It flows as the being. It flows as the energy field of the self. That's what that hum is. When I first heard the hum, I'm like, oh, that's the hum of the universe, I thought to myself. Yes, it is, but it's also the hum of you as the universe, of myself as the universe. And sometimes the hum can become so loud that it's actually physically felt. It's felt as reverberations or waves of intelligence moving through the field of the physiology. I'm mostly giving you expressions of my experience of it. But what I'd like to do is give everybody a healing so that everyone can be quite sure that they're experiencing it directly. That's what I'd like. So let's just ask those Vedic sounds, what's the best way to do that? Okay, here's what I'm seeing. The sounds can constrain themselves into specific energy areas of the energy field. So when we talk about the web of life, those Vedic sounds or cognitions are actually comprising the threads in the web of life. And they can form themselves into everybody's physiology as two channels that are running along, looks kind of like along the back of the physiology, or they're inside the astral field. You've got the cord of light that runs through the center of the astral field, right? And then on either side, there are two others. So you've got one in the middle and then two on either side in the back, kind of like in the area where your wings would be if you were an angel, okay? So in that area. And these two channels of sound are creating a relationship with the initial cord of light that runs right through the core of the physiology in order to maintain a threefold structure. We know the Vedic cognitions are comprised of a threefold structure, right? Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. So Rishi is the knower or the seer. Devata is the transforming energy. It's the process by which the seeing takes place, and Chandas is the seen or the known, and all three are the same. All three are the same. They center around the same basic fundamental, and I'm just looking to see what the fundamental is at this time. It appears to be Agni. Agni, the primordial fire, the fire of pure truth from the beginning of creation. So there, even saying the word Agni, just like last week when we said the word Manu, it was like, oh, Manu. It's like, oh, Agni. that Agni, just saying it, recognizing it, awakens it, and produces a relationship between ourselves and that Davic structure, that structure of creation, that primordial, eternal, ancient light. Yay, other people, I've got raised hands coming up here online, guys. It wakes it up. It wakes it up. And so it wakes up the capacity to know. It wakes up the ability to wake up, basically. That's what our healing collective created. Like, I didn't know we were going to do that. That was wonderful. No doubt it will tie into what we do next in this session. And as I mentioned before, we've got some great questions that came in, and usually I save questions for the end, but I feel that the questions that have come in are actually excellent for helping to unfold some of the experiences and understandings about healing relationships. So we will go through and do some healing for, now that we've healed our relationship with our ability to awaken our own consciousness, we're in a prime position to heal relationships with others. So one of the relationships I wanted to talk about was relationship with parents. And again, this was a thread from yesterday that I feel has the opportunity for a little more complete elaboration and a more complete healing. Relationships with parents. So that's our first relationship. And one of the points that I wanted to bring out about this relationship is that children don't come with an instruction manual, so, and everyone is different. So if you have a first child and you think, okay, now I got that figured out, and then you have the second child, it's like, oh, that one's completely different. So it's not a simple process necessarily, but, and the other thing is that parents are infallible. I mean, parents are fallible. Parents are fallible. They make mistakes. They have their individual boundaries and blind spots and barriers that they're dealing with, and therefore have no choice but to have to work around those blind spots. Big healing for blind spots yesterday. So we're going to go into the field of first relationships with parents. First relationships are born of the vision of the potential of what a relationship between a child and a parent could be. And children always come with the fundamental intention of the child when they come is to provide a perspective of love to their parents, particularly their mothers, but to provide a perspective of love to them that parent would not have otherwise experienced. Here's another thing I wanted to say about this. As humans, we keep coming back again and again, first to achieve some level of perfection or attain some level of success in a particular area. But once that's happened, it seems we're never satisfied. Then we need to come back and do it again under more compromised conditions. And then once we've achieved success under compromised conditions, we come back and do it again under even more compromised conditions like that. So no matter how successful a person has been as a mother, as a father, as a parent in past incarnations or in previous times you may have known them, or no matter how good you were to them when you were their parents, this time around, it's coming in with some kind of little twist that makes it interesting and makes it different and allows for the divine to find that beautiful archetypal love from yet another angle. Because the love of the relationship between parent and child is one of those great eternal forms born of the cosmic tide as it exists in its unmanifest state between non-awake and awake consciousness. So we're going right back to the source or the core of the relationship with parents. And it's right there in that tide, that rocking. They call it rocking the cradle of Krishna. It rocks between consciousness fully folded in its own deepest silence and consciousness alert and ready to pounce. Yes, between being and becoming. Yes. Yes. It's all in the para-prakriti level. It's not manifest yet, but it just sits down there, and there's this point of relationship that has the potential. It is infinitely tender. It is infinitely refined. It is the beginning source for all the relationships, all of them. So that vision, that experience, the bliss of that is so profound that when a soul decides to come into the lifetime, they're like, yes, that. I want to manifest that. I want that in my relationships. And so we all come in with that intention, like, I'm going to grab that thing and I'm going to bring it and make it and find a way to express it, even under compromised conditions or whatever. Then we come out here to the field of reality, and we have to deal with the manifestation of values that are exactly opposite to the parts of that we want to bring forward. So one question came up for one lady, was saying she had this experience of being betrayed by her mother. Ouch. And whenever the mother has a chance to, give her attention to the daughter, she always diverts it and finds something else, even something insignificant that's more fascinating and more interesting to put attention on than her own daughter. And the daughter felt after a long time that that's like, well, yes, I'm your mother, but you're not as interesting as that peanut over there, or you're not as interesting as some TV show I want to watch, or you're not as interesting, whatever. And it builds up over a lifetime and causes layers of feelings of being betrayed and resentment and so forth. And those layers had to build up to a point that they sufficiently balanced the quality of the love. Like, the quality of the love was so great, it was so huge, it was so amazing, that the imbalance, which it's like the imbalance acts as a counterpoint or a contrast to that balance, that quality of love. And what happens is the shadow, in other words, shows where it shows where the source of the light is coming from. When the shadow is there showing that source of light, then the first beneficiary and the first recipient of the light is oneself. And then if any of that light oozes out and spills over onto mother, well, fine. But the initial relationship is the relationship of the mother of creation within the context of her own self-referral dynamics. So that is an unchanging, unmoving reality. And so that reality is so abstract that what we're doing at every point is trying to bring it out to the surface where it can be fully expressed. So it needs to be fully understood to be fully expressed. And to be fully understood, it needs to be fully contained within one's own self first. Because anything, and we talked about this yesterday, any love that you get from anybody in your world or in your environment comes through their filter. And so when it comes through their filter, it's not going to be the full complement. It's not going to be the full expression of your love. It's just going to be your love coming back to you through their filter. So first, it needs to be fully internally understood. I'm seeing it understood in terms of many facets. Like a puzzle with lots of pieces that fit together in a perfect coordination. Do you have some water? You're okay? Okay. The pieces of the puzzle, it's the junctions between the pieces that are important. It's in the gaps between these specific aspects or facets of the relationship, which are the points where wholeness emerges, where totality finds its full expression, where those same gaps are the ones we worked with yesterday when we were doing the exercise to activate the Vedic intelligence in the body that heals it. So in this case, the Davic intelligence can also heal relationships, and it emerges from the gaps in the relationship of the little packages of experience that we share with someone that we love. So we have little interactions with them, right? There's a moment where you look, or you say something and they say something like that. Little interactions, and between them, in the gap, is where the intelligence comes forth. So we're just looking at the gaps. The gaps tend to be blind spots, right? This is why we did the big healing for blind spots, and why we did the big healing with Agni, to awaken that primordial light, to shine through those gaps, to illuminate the gaps, so that everybody has access, can recognize that intelligence that's there. And then the recognition alone is normally sufficient to activate the heart and to activate the tremendous, loving, compassionate capability within the being to fold into that abstract element. It's that Agni light, that primordial light coming through the gaps, which is being loved and appreciated and adored and cherished and nurtured and expanded through the interaction with it. Then it shines through all the gaps. One of the points that came up at the end of yesterday's session, because we did a lot of healing for blind spots, was that it's the nature of the human nervous system and the human senses of perception to fill in gaps. There's some kind of like optical illusions. Some optical illusions work on that premise, that you get a line, you get a bunch of lines in a row, and then one of the lines breaks. But that what happens when you just glance across the series of lines is your eye fills in that one broken line. It fills in the gap of the broken line. It's our nature to fill in the gaps. And when we understand that it's our nature to fill in the gaps with structures which are experienced before they're understood, experienced first. And I have to say again, this fabulous quote that I brought up yesterday from Black Elk, because it's been really an interesting thing that ties in so beautifully with many things. And his quote was that, I understand more than I can say, and I experience more than I can understand. When we get that this quote is also, I love that quote, it's encapsulating the nature of the way we process information through the three Mahamarmas. So I understand, it comes from the heart. We understand our reality from that level of the heart, but we say from the head, right? The mouth, and it all comes out. The analytical mind breaks down what we understand and has a way of expressing it. But I experience more than I understand. Experiential level comes from the gut, because that's the area where we clue in or connect into our collective. So there's a huge, huge neural network in the gut, which is all about experience. It's all about direct experience. Here's another thing. Each of the different chakras of the body tends to have a filtering effect on the energy, the life force that rises up through the earth and comes up through the physiology. So the lower chakras are dealing with a lot more information. By the time the chakras, we get up to the top of the physiology, everything has rarefied. It goes through a big refinement process in the chest, and it's just come down to very specific bits of information that are applicable to the present moment experience. But the earlier, the deeper levels of the physiology experience this amazing fullness of universal information, universal input, the cosmic tide. All right, so I hope that it helped to answer that question about the mother who was not very kind. Another thing this lady did point out, she had a lot of her own personal, really great insights about it. And I'd say that her biggest, most beautiful insight is that it's caused her to become very self-sufficient. When you have a parent who's dysfunctional, then of course you have to be functional. So Beautifully put. And it is part of the evolutionary process. And as I mentioned before, a lot of times, sweetheart, oh, a lot of times we do choose to take on a relationship that's got dysfunction in it because we know we could have done it the easy way. And that's not interesting anymore. That's like kindergarten stuff. All right. So here is another question. Hello, dear Dorothy. I'd like to ask about my feeling that my heart is more closed in relationships these days. This is what I feel. Like I don't have patience anymore with people, yet I feel I work towards being more loving. Thank you if you have the time. Yes, I do have the time, and thank you for that question. Actually, in the case of the very beautiful, very giving, accommodating lady who asked that question, I would say basically it's good. What you're doing is you are experimenting with your ability to establish healthy boundaries with people. You're playing with it a little bit, and you're discovering, how much you can hold on to your boundaries, and how you hold on to your boundaries, and how people react. And if I set a boundary here and someone violates my boundary and I don't react well, maybe I come out with some hot anger instead of cold anger, right? If I do that, well, is that going to completely obliterate the relationship, or is the relationship strong enough to maintain in spite of the fact that maybe I was a little harsh with that person, or impatient, or showed some frustration or something like that? So you learn which relationships are solid and stable enough that if you do have to be a little bit firm with someone, that the relationship isn't destroyed, but that somehow it can at least, and we talked about this yesterday, put you and the other person into a dialogue of coming together to understand each other's points of view. And it's that type of dialogue that actually fortifies and strengthens and deepens relationships. It makes relationships more stable. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if the relationship is already stable enough that if you have to raise your voice or lose your temper or show some frustration or something, that the other person will just go, okay, I see you have a boundary there, but this is how I feel about it, and so let's work this out. Then you have a relationship, something you can really count on, something you can really depend upon. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And in the end, I think people realize that it's the nature of the human emotional structure to kind of go up and down. There's always, the cosmic tide is always there, right? So sometimes it happens that something comes out. Nobody likes to be rude. Yes.
I feel like it could also be like this essence of finding the boundaries within a relationship.
Yeah.
And like these relationships, like favorably are structured around unconditional love.
Right.
So
ideally,
if you're not being patient with other people, then like the people that are still recognizing that lack of patience, they're able to still love you unconditionally, even though you're not feeling very loving.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. So the question, just in case it didn't come through my mic, the question was, it was an insight that relationships are based on unconditional love, basically. But when there is some roughness in a relationship, that if there's enough unconditional love established, then if one person is feeling a little rougher one day, the other individual can still hold on to that unconditional love and can still help maintain the connection. Does that basically, that's basically it, yeah. It strengthens it because it brings the unconditional love forward as an expression. Yeah, it's a beautiful point. Exactly. She said loving the shadow side. So brilliant, right? And so this is essentially one of the, I think, most important mechanics about working with the causal level of the physiology, which I've mentioned several times, is one of our great power tools for manifesting anything, is that at the causal level of creation, if we find ourselves favoring over to the light, then always there will be a compliment. There's always, always a compliment. And the power of the causal administration is that we bring the complements together, and together evolutionary transformation is promoted through that union. So it's not saying like okay, for example, my husband and I are very agreeable people. And so we say yes. We like to say yes. We like to help people and do favors for people and promote we like people around us to be happy. So what happened? We created the most disagreeable sons, I swear. Our sons are just so feisty, and if you ask them anything, they just say no. And then, they're just like, and they're big and strong and like, they're like big warriors on the battlefield or something. I know. We did that. And oh my God. So what we learned from that, why were we so agreeable? We were so agreeable because we wanted people to love us, and we wanted to love them, and we wanted to all be happy schmappy all the time. We didn't want to lose our temper or whatever, So what happened is we discovered, by producing these disagreeable sons, we discovered how extremely lovable disagreeable people are. I mean, wow, that was such a wake up. It was such a wake up call. I mean, sure, they're disagreeable. Sure, they don't just respect you. You have to earn their respect. But my goodness, once you earn their respect means something, right? If someone comes up to you and goes, oh, I just think you're the greatest person in the world. And you're like, but do I know you? It's like, have we met? It's like, then it's like, how much does that compliment mean? But if somebody who's seen you at your best and seen you at your worst still respects and loves you, still honors and cherishes you, then it really means something, because you've been through it with them, been through the good side and the bad side. And it's very powerful, and it's a huge, huge bonding tool. Yes.
It's like that reflection.
She's saying it's a reflection. I'm going to translate.
Of you having a hard time loving yourself in those moments and like condemning yourself for feeling that way.
Yes.
But they're a reflection that it's just like you're human. It's okay to be that.
It's okay to be human. Yeah. She's saying, oh, it's so beautiful. She's saying it's a reflection of the fact that, when you're at your worst, there's a tendency to self-condemn and to feel like a terrible person. But that if somebody loves you anyway, it reflects back the reality that as humans, this is part of the nature of our reality. This is what we're dealing with. And the beauty of it is the kicker. And I said this just before a minute ago, kind of quickly, but it's really good to reiterate it again. And that is that the evolution is promoted from the dynamic interaction between the darker elements and the lighter elements of self, that Brahman consumes everything. Was that what you were going to say? No, he's nodding, because there's another question. Yes.
Well, we're just trying to work out this dichotomy. On the one hand, is trying to set up healthy boundaries.
Yes.
On the other side, is
dichotomy, healthy boundaries on one side, yes.
On the other side is the law of attraction.
Law of attraction, you want to send out positive energy.
And you
Right.
have to somehow learn how to set up a healthy boundary while not creating like a negative response.
Right. You have to learn how to set up a healthy boundary without, oh, there's my guy. You have to set up a healthy boundary without creating a negative response. I know. In case we get too serious. We do have Dave with us. Anyway, thank you for the question and the point. So, yeah, so I think one of the premises there is something that my husband and I had to learn from our relationship with our sons. And that was that it's really okay to set up healthy boundaries. It is so completely, totally fine to do that. Because if there's a sense of, well, that other person wants to walk all over me and I don't really want to be walked all over, but I don't want them to get mad at me either. So I'll just let them walk all over me. It's okay. I'm used to having my back broken. It's happened before, you know, then that's, you know, and if that, from that like mental framework, it's very difficult to feel all right setting up healthy boundaries in a way which still reflects that positivity. But if there's that sense of, this healthy boundary is not only healthy for me, it's like really healthy for everybody. Because yeah, that person would like to exploit me, but if they don't exploit me, then they have to come up with their own resources, and that will be so good for them. Or if they don't exploit me, then they will learn how to deal with their own problems instead of having me solve their problem every time. That will be so empowering for them. So then at that point, when the healthy boundary is set, it's set with the understanding that ultimately it's the very best, most positive thing that that person could ever experience. And so then I think at that point, when the healthy boundary comes to the foreground, again, it's standing on the leg of truth, the dharmic leg of truth, which I think is a really important principle here, because what we're really talking about, this question is really aiming at how do we bring some compassion and sweetness into the process of setting up those healthy boundaries, while maintaining that compassion is more associated with putting positive energy out into the world and creating impulses of intelligence that have an uplifting effect. And the answer is, the larger vision recognizes that the healthy boundaries are also good for others. Yes, I was just about to do that question. Thank you. Thank you. And sorry, I saved it for the end. Maybe I saved the best for last. I don't know. But this great question came in last night about how do we deal with relationships with people who've passed out of the body? And I'm turning a few pages here because one of our longest time webinar subscribers, one of the guys who's been with us since the very beginning of these webinars, which was like back in 2014, all honor and respect, sent me several pages of quotes and information about death and about what other wise people, the Theosophy, Betty J. Eady and Annie Besant, and of course Maharishi, quotes from Maharishi about death. And I think one of these experiences was almost, literally, it was almost word for word my own experience when my father died. So incredibly close that I thought to myself, and it was so fascinating to read this other woman's experience, I thought, maybe it would be good to share this experience with everyone. So the point from last night is, when a person dies, the relationship is not over. But what happened to me, it's very little bit tender, but a great joy to share this incredibly powerful experience with you. My beautiful father, my dear father, with whom I had an incredible relationship in this life, I have to say, he was like a perfect father to me. God bless him. When he died, we had a Vedic ceremony performed at the funeral home. And as it turned out, I was the only person who showed up. So I went into the room where the body was laying, and I saw, the body was in a cardboard casket because it was going to be cremated. So I didn't see the body, but I saw around the cardboard box, there was this most beautiful energy, most beautiful. Never in my life have I seen anything so exquisite, so without words, beautiful. And I was with this woman who was going to perform the Vedic ceremony, and I literally ran across the room, and I peered down into the box at my father, and I said to her, but I wasn't looking at my father, I was looking at what was like almost a pool without a bottom of this exquisite, luscious, it was like nectar or something, but it was just pure energy. And I said to her, what is that? And before she could let out one word, it went like this. And I was like, oh, it went inside me. and we looked out, and he was smiling. And I said, he's smiling. And she said, he's really enjoying this. And I was just like, whoa, wow, that was so interesting, right? what was that? So this is very interesting. Another lady gave almost an identical experience. I was amazed when I read it from he sent me all these papers. I'm not sure I can isolate it out. Anyway, oh yeah, it says here that her beloved father had made his journey to heavenly abode. He went with bliss, peace, and with the silence of the absolute ringing in our ears, that silence ringing. On taking his final breath, he immediately entered the heart of his daughter, filling it with light, with fullness and radiance. She feels she is carrying him inside her, and he is enjoying all the delights of his life, all the delights of the life he missed for so long while being confined in his bed without the ability to function properly. Now father and daughter are eating together, walking together, having wonderful conversations, and are having so much fun. And I read that and I went, wow, pretty amazing. Because when I had that experience, no one warned me. It's like the other side when you get pregnant. No one tells you that morning sickness is all day long, but it is, and all night long. They call it morning sickness. Like, why? Anyway, it's okay. Yeah, all day, right? It should be just called all day sickness. It should be called 4-month sickness. Anyway, yeah, I know. Anyway, yeah, my experience was that was on the 3rd day after he had technically died, and that I noticed that the life force in the body left slowly, very, very slowly, very gradually. And what happened was the grosser, denser energies left the body first, and then the subtler energies came out later. So while he was in the funeral home, the most subtle energies were actually exiting the body, and they had formed a sort of pool around his physiology. And they were some essence of his being that he was not able to take with him where he was going. He knew my father was a long time Siddha. He had become a Siddha before I did. So long time meditator, long time seeping in the silence of being in his life and exploring it, a great intellectual, great scholar, a great intellect. And he had been dedicated to the experience and understanding of that divinity. And so he was planning to let it all go so that he could seep in silence. He could go into his Mahasamadhi. And so I got some of the subtle energies, which included the ability to speak. Wow. So when I speak, you get a little bit of both of us there. And yes, this point from the papers was that when you love somebody who's not in the body, their reality, it reflects that love in a very palpable and tangible form. And when you think, oh, that person's dead, now I can really complain about them. And you, oh dear, and you really complain about them. That also takes a palpable form in their space. So, yeah, because there's one man who's done a tremendous amount of research into the various dimensions of creation is explorer named Jürgen Ziwe. And I'm not actually a big advocate of out-of-body experiences. He's done it through out-of-body experiences. And like I said, I'm not a big advocate because out-of-body experiences break down or destroy mind-body integration, and we don't want to do that. Enlightenment is best accomplished with really clean, tight, clear, profound, and precise mind-body coordination. However, Jürgen's work is very avant-garde, and he has somehow managed, he's managed somehow to overcome that problem of mind-body, loss of mind-body integration. I don't know, but he does have a lot of pretty amazing information, so if you want to look him up. Also, he's a great artist, and he has some really incredible artwork on YouTube. Okay, here's a question. From last night's question, traditional cultures have ceremonies to honor and gain support from ancestors. Is there something we can do without such ceremonies? Great question. I have thought about this before. One of the things we do in the West is we do ancestral research. So even though we don't have like specific ceremonies for honoring the ancestors, what happened was several years ago, my husband and I signed up for a membership in a group online group called Ancestry.com. And we were able to go on, if you know back 2, 3, 4 generations, you can go on there and you can, once you found like grandparents, great-grandparents, maybe great-great-grandparents, then all of a sudden your family tree hooks into other people's family trees, and you can then follow your lineage back hundreds and hundreds of years. You can't, not like forever, but you can go back pretty far with, you start hitting keyhole ancestors, and then you can follow back, and most of the ancestors whose lineages have been recorded were those who were either well-to-do or educated. So what tends to happen when you look back, the further you go back, the more you find people who are amazing people, you know, who are doing interesting things and who were important enough that their ancestry is recorded and so forth. And so it was fascinating to do that. But energetically, from energy healing, what we can do is spend time in our ancestral archives. We all have an ancestral archive. It's physically in the DNA. So when we're in the ancestral archive energetically, we're also appreciating and experiencing our own physiologies from a molecular level. But the ancestral archive, it has this constraint on it that one does not enter the ancestral archive without the capacity to promote only the highest good, right? We go in with the intention, can't go in with the intention to create havoc. That's not going to work. You'll get blocked. You won't be able to get into the archive. If you think, oh, I'm going to go back and tell that great-grandfather of mine something, you know, it's like, nope, sorry. But yeah, right, good. She says, may as well just look in the mirror, right? For sure, man. So, but going back into the ancestral archive, there is, first of all, ancestral archive is accessed through the astral field, because that's where the body forms all these threads or streams of consciousness that connects us to our ancestors, it connects us to our past lives, it connects us to the whole web of life. So astral level is the launching point for accessing your ancestral archive. But the ancestral archive has a reality that ranges from the astral level, well, physical, up to the molecules, but all the way down to the field of pure being. And everybody's ancestral archive has a particular feel. It has a particular flavor or quality to it, which is the collective consciousness of all of those who came before you. Now realize that the people who make up your ancestral archive are the successful ones. They're the ones who manage to make some kind of successful coupling with the opposite gender and produce offspring and raise those offspring to adulthood, because there are plenty of people that didn't. So there's just that alone is a good place to start appreciating the ancestors, and also that they came to work out relationships. Anybody who has a family was working out relationships. So right there. And so what I'm seeing also for a lot of people is that there's also an access thread from the heart area. So that's interesting. So I mentioned the astral level, we can access to the ancestral archive, but also the astral level as it manifests at the heart level of the physiology, because all of those couplings, all of those relationships were ultimately love relationships. Okay, I'd like some more information on that, please. Oh God, our time. And there's also a question about relationship with pets that I'm not getting to. So maybe I get to make an extra video about that one. Oh, in the heart area, the download here, I'm feeling everyone receiving a download for the heart that's in relationship to the ancestral archive. And the download is for specific information for accessing what is known as tarpanum, or offerings to the ancestors, ancient offerings, rice, sesame seeds, and water offered at the new moon. But when we do it through energy healing, the our divine intelligence can select the specific new moon which is most appropriate for any given ancestor. So you can offer tarpanum to your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, but it can be done in conjunction with a specific new moon, which is located in a way which helps to promote a harmonious relationship between you and your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. So it's done energetically. I mean, you can go out under the new moon with rice, sesame seeds, and water and, offer. But energetically, we can build layers and layers and layers of tarpanum. We can offer to that grandmother 1,000 tarpanums or 1,000,000 tarpanums or 1,000,000,000 tarpanums or infinite tarpanum. Infinite tarpanum. The offering is done as a resonation in the causal field of the physiology by archetypal forms that are associated with the great priests and sages and seers that understand precisely the setting of the mind, emotions, and physiology at the time of such an offering. And all we have to do to make that happen is recognize and appreciate. It's really simple. When tarpanum is offered to the ancestors, and right now in our session, I know we're a few minutes over, is being offered to everyone's ancestors, but we have to do this. It's important. So tarpanum is being offered to everyone's ancestors. Infinite tarpanum. Infinite tarpanum. Infinite. And I'm seeing it just like reverberating back and forth and back and forth and back and forth through the ancestral archive all over the place. It's cultivating a space of innocence in the heart, which I think I might have referred to yesterday, but it was such an important point. It kind of went by quickly. It was very subtle. And that is that when the child comes into the world, there is a quality of just pure, innocent perception of everything. Innocent perception. Somehow that quality of innocent perception opens the channel for the archetypal divine love, which is the love upon which our initial intention to come into this reality is based. It allows that to come forward. It allows that, it's like it like gives it a free passage. It's like a free passage. It's a ticket. Here, you can go on the toll road and you don't have to pay a toll. Free passage. It is the quality that every parent first sees in their child. When the baby first arrives, they arrive with the most exquisite, perfect awareness. Absolutely beautiful. All right, so that's a very nice note to leave everyone with, to leave us all. We can end on this very high, very beautiful note. Thank you, everyone, for being with me. Thank you for the question about pets. I will address that. My dear friend who asked that question so beautifully often inspires me many, many innovative healings and so forth. So I bow down with gratitude to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank yous in the chats. Thank you to everybody. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing everybody most everybody's on those subscription programs. So I look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for helping to promote these amazing healings that we had today. I hope that everyone's relationships are exquisite and profound and evolutionary as we move forward from here, and especially the relationship of divinity with its own nature through you, so that every particle of your being is just humming with that. Thank you all. Bye. Oh, thanks, Dave.